We spoke yesterday, it was mentioned several times, about the issue of younger people and how we get them engaged and what the benefits of that might be. And there was one part of the UK that really grabbed this by the horns about a decade ago, and their intent was to make themselves a child-friendly city. It's Leeds, and we're going to cross there now and speak to Andy Lloyd, Head of Workforce Development and Change at the local authority there. It is the second biggest local authority in England, so there are a lot of people, and you can imagine a lot of dialogues and discussions have been had. Andy, you're very welcome, and I'm very much looking forward to getting an understanding of what you have been doing in Leeds. Just before we came back from the break, I asked you, have your attempts worked? You said they have worked. Tell us how.
Well, thanks very much indeed, and thank you for having me, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So I'm Andy Lloyd, Head of Workforce Development and Change in Leeds. Leeds, just a bit of context, Leeds is a large city. Many of you have visited the city, and when you're allowed to, please do come back and visit us again. We love having visitors in the city. 187,000 children and young people live in Leeds, and that's a lot of children, a lot of young people, a lot of responsibility to get it right for them. We do that by uniting as a city around that fact, but also that plan. So we have a single partnership, a single united partnership with the local authority, with the third sector, the not-for-profit sector, the faith sector, with businesses, with politicians, and we have a single senior partnership which sets the vision and the plan. And that's important as I go through what I'm going to say today, and I'll come back to that. We want schools to be at the heart of our communities, and that's just again to say that we need to use the resources that we have within our communities to do what they need to do and do what we need them to do in terms of working with children and families. And we calculated that there are approximately 75,000 people working with children and families in Leeds on a weekly basis. And what we mean by that is social workers, doctors, health visitors, teachers, guide and cubs and scout leaders, all those people. And I've missed out lots of groups, I'm sure, but there are a lot of people working with our young people. And what that means is that we have to make sure that we unify and we come around a single ambition. Because if we don't, the real risk is that we're all doing different things, and we're all doing things which either duplicate or we have gaps and children are missing out. So that's just a little bit of a context to what I'm talking about. Leeds has a bold ambition. And this is something we launched in 2012, and it's that the ambition is to be the best city for children and young people to grow up in. And that's an ambition which we unite around as a city. It's got all party political support. An official launch, as I said, in 2012. But this ambition is so important to us as we think about how we're going to work with our children and young people, and how our children and young people are going to experience growing up in our city. I wanted to share 3 quotes with you. They're very important quotes to me. And when I was in the office, I used to have them above my desk there, and now I have them above my desk in my home. The first from Bronfman Bremer: every child needs at least one adult who is irrationally crazy about him or her. So important that children feel that someone is on their side, someone has got their back, someone wants the very, very best for them. Second one by Madge Bray in her book Poppies on the Rubbish Heap. A child's current behaviour is an essentially sane response to an untenable set of life circumstances. If a child's life circumstances are untenable, are bad, are unpleasant, are damaging, that will affect their behaviour. And we need to understand and we need to be mindful of why children, what's happening in children's lives as we look about why children behave in the way that they do. And finally, from Nelson Mandela Grace Michel in the year 2000, an open letter to the United Nations: we cannot waste our precious children. Not another one, not another day. It's long past time for us to act on their behalf. And I like that quote because it talks about children being precious. And just to put a little bit of context on that, I have 3 children. They're all adults and have moved away from home. But I love my children and I think they're precious. Now, that's not particularly news to anybody. Fathers are meant to do that. But if we think about the cohort of 175,000 children in Leeds, are they precious? Do we consider them to be a precious part of our city? And do we consider them as a precious part that need our support, and we need to be child friendly? You see, values are everything. There's a lovely phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you go on the web, you'll find lots of different people saying that they thought of that first. I don't know who thought of it first, but it's a very helpful phrase. The culture of an organization, the culture of a city, the culture of practice eats all the strategy documents that you may have for breakfast. Now, of course, processes are important and mustn't and can't be ignored. We need strategy documents and we need those processes. But processes don't bring about change. They don't improve the lives of children and families. People do. Just as a point there, you might want to come back on me on some of this stuff. And if you do, please do type your questions in the box below, and we'll come to some of those later. But the values of an organization, the values of a city, the values that we express clearly matter. And it's all about relationships. It's all about how we do things. Now, I know that quite soon you're going to have a conversation around restorative practice, so I won't spend much time on this, but this is what we call the 4 ways of being window, with the various boxes. We have challenge going up and down and support across. And the point of this is really, we need to try to be working as much as we can in the with box, working with people, not doing things to people, not doing things for people, doing things with people. And the phrase that we use is high support and high challenge. We need to be supportive, but we need to be challenging. And that relationship between support and challenge is really, really important. And when we work in the with box, when we're doing things with people, with communities, with individuals, with families, we see better outcomes for the children and the families and the communities that we're working with. So I could spend hours on this, but I won't. But that's a very important part of our culture and what we deliver. Relationships are vital, doing things to or for. Now, this is something that I've increasingly found as we've been in lockdown and as we've been doing a lot of stuff on screen. I spend a lot of time, like you will, each day on screen. Relationships versus transaction. And I suppose that, put very simply, if we're not careful, when we meet people, we get into transactional conversations. Can you do this? Will you do that? I'll do this if you do that. And it becomes very transactional. And what we're missing out on is the idea of relationship. How are you? How's your week been? How's your weekend been? How are you coping at the moment with this extraordinary situation? And that's true for us as we work with colleagues, but it's so much more important as we work with children and we think about our conversations with children and their families. If we get into transaction rather than relationship, we are moving away from the restorative working with, and we get very quickly into a stuck place because the transaction isn't working. Again, please do come back at me at that in the question box if you'd like to. We need to understand the whole of the system, and the way as a community, an organisation is a system, and it has different parts. And if a bit like a balloon, if you squeeze at one end, it will bulge at the other. Do we understand the system as we're working with children and families? Do we understand the system and what it feels like to be a child or a young person in that system? And then we need to work in and with the system rather than try and fight against it. And we all have a part to play. Everybody within our community has a part to play. I was in Berlin a few years ago and took this. It's a mural on the East Side Gallery. I won't attempt the German, but the English says, many small people who in many small places do many small things can alter the face of the world. What you do, what I do, what we do together in relationship in the system, we can make a difference. And I suppose that that's something that's so important. We can actually change the lives for the better of our youngest citizens. So we have just one question in Leeds. What's it like to be a child or young person growing up in Leeds? Going back to the quotes I mentioned earlier, if you asked me when my children were living at home what it was like for them to grow up in Leeds, I could tell you. I could tell you what their favourite television programme was. I could tell you what makes them scared or sad. I could tell you their favourite book, their favourite toy. I could tell you what they like eating. I can tell you how they like to be woken up. For each of the children that live in our city, do we know what it's like for them to grow up? Do we know the answer to that question? Or does somebody know? Or are there children for whom there is no adult who knows what it's like for them currently to be growing up in Leeds? So this is a really important question. And when we ask the question, how do we make it better? We mustn't be satisfied with what we have at the moment. I want for my children, for them to have a better life than I've had. So that should be the truth for all of our children in Leeds and wherever else you live. So Child-Friendly City is about putting the child at the centre of all we do and putting the child at the heart of the city's growth strategy. And I suppose just very briefly on this, what that means is we need to be thinking about why our young people, as they grow up, why they would stay. If we make our communities, our cities, our towns, our villages unwelcoming to children and young people, as soon as they can, they will leave to go somewhere where it's more welcoming. So we need to be thinking about making children welcome, so when they grow up, they will stay and they will contribute to the local economy. And so I want the children of Leeds to be so happy and enjoying their childhood in Leeds that they'll stay in Leeds and then become our taxpayers of the future. So I'm a social worker by background, so I'm not great at the economic strategy. I'm much more comfortable talking about the welfare and well-being of children. But I think that we need to be thinking about the economy as well and the growth strategy in the city. And then just a little phrase there: children live in families, families create communities, communities make cities. Children are not outside our system. They need to be inside, and they need to be in the centre of our thinking as we think about our cities. But this can't be just a small group of people's jobs. This can't be the Children's Services Department or a third sector organisation or a small group of people. It has to be the whole community. And what we've done in Leeds is develop a network of about 1,000 now child-friendly ambassadors. And our ambassadors are politicians, businesses, not-for-profit organisations, the faith sector, individuals. They're big companies and they're small organisations and single-owner businesses as well, right the way across the system. And the point of that is that we are then embracing and we're harnessing the commonwealth of knowledge and skills in the city for our youngest citizens. So we're harnessing that ability to go to find a skill or a piece of knowledge that we have within the city, but we don't own within our own small networks. So we hold networking events and we explain the need. And this is again quite important as we think about the way that we engage with our community. If you work in an architect's firm, it might not be your common knowledge to know what the challenges are for children and young people in the city. So it's our job who do know that to explain that need. And we don't ask for money. We do sometimes ask for sponsorship, but we don't go out and say, will you pay your subs or will you give us some money? We ask for their expertise and be specific about their ask. Now, our logo is an orange thumb, an orange thumbs up, and a few years ago, the gardeners of Leeds planted an orange thumb directly opposite a children's playground. Nobody asked them to do it. It wasn't on a strategic plan. It wasn't part of a promotion. It's just that they had some flowers and they planted it in the shape of an orange thumb. Now, that is when you start to understand that the ownership of the child-friendly ambition is within the city. These guys, these women who were planting out this garden were motivated for whatever reason to plant an orange thumb, and it makes me smile every time I see it because I like that concept. We put the child at the centre and we let them have a voice. Letting children have a voice is easy. Letting that voice have influence is more complex. We need to make sure that we hear the voice of the child and then let that voice have influence. And just to jump to the final bullet point there, the consultations and appointments. When I was appointed to this role just under 10 years ago, I was appointed by a number of different panels, interviewed by a number of different panels, including a group of children. And they gave me some nice feedback afterwards, the best of which was that I'd make a nice Santa Claus. So whether I got the job or not, I was happy at that point, but I did actually get the job as well. So we need to give children's voice and influence. And one of the ways we do that is we have a children's mayor. This is Sam. Sam is our current children's mayor. You can see him with a mask on, but his mayoral robes on. He's 10 years old. It's always a 10-year-old. We have a vote among our 10-year-olds in the city through the schools. 10-year-olds are invited to write a manifesto, and the best 12 of those go to a public vote of our children, and then somebody is elected. And Sam this year is elected as our children's mayor. Sam reads his manifesto to our full council meeting, 99 councillors, and it becomes official council policy. So we are giving children a voice, but more importantly, we're giving that voice influence. Lots to talk about here that you can pick up on the chat there. Local context is vital. You can't just pick and drop what we've done in Leeds. It has to be your version of what we do in Leeds. You'll have policies and you'll have requirements that you can't change. And I understand that, and that's absolutely fine. But whatever you can do, take the best ideas from wherever and whoever you can. Because don't forget, at the end of the day, there's only one question. And the question is, what's it like to be a child or young person growing up in your community, in your village, in your town, in your city? What's it like? Do we know the answer to that question? Do we, as individuals, contribute to the knowledge of the answer to that question? Are we all united around that particular question? Do we know? And once we know, how do we make it better? How do we improve the lives of our youngest citizens each time we come to work, each time we move around our community? Thanks very much indeed. That's the end of my presentation. I'm really grateful that you've been here and listened to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. There's a lot to take in there. And if you don't mind, we'll kind of spend a few minutes picking through it. Really interesting stuff. Please do send your comments and questions to us. I know a couple of you have already. And I'll turn to them in just a second, but we have Andy for a few minutes longer. So if you want to find out more, or indeed challenge him a little bit on what he said, then I'm sure he'd happily engage with you on that as well. Because the danger with all the stuff, Andy, and I said it at the beginning of the day, is that it sounds a bit pie in the sky, idealistic, and actually this stuff deserves to be interrogated. And I know, I'm sure, in Leeds, you have interrogated it. That's why it's lasted the best part of a decade, and you're kind of sure and proud of your the outcomes you've had. You started off at the beginning, you said something that it was important to unite as a city. Now that is one of those phrases that I'm referring to. Sounds very easy, not necessarily so. Practically, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's a journey, and it's a journey of a number of years. But I think that the two things I would say. One is unite around the common cause of making Leeds a child-friendly city. So child-friendly is a simple concept, and it's a really, really complicated journey. But it's a journey which we need to be on together. And I think that what I would say really is talk about the contribution that individuals can make or organisations can make more than the differences that we have. Because if we unite around the idea that children are we need somebody to be crazy about each of the children in our city, then all of a sudden we have a common cause that is hard to disagree with. Of course, there are lots of other priorities, and I don't expect everybody, the 750,000 people that live in Leeds, don't expect every one of them to engage with our child-friendly process. But as long as lots do, then we're on the right track.
Is there a problem that what one person sees as the best for a child might not be what their neighbour thinks is the best for a child? Culture plays a huge part in this. Yeah. How do you approach that?
Well, of course, and I suppose by not being too prescriptive, there are clear boundaries around how we can bring children up and what we shouldn't be doing, and how children shouldn't be treated. But within that, of course, there are lots of different ways, and we wouldn't want to interfere with that at all. That wouldn't be appropriate nor desirable. But what is desirable is this high ambition, and keeping the high ambition at mind, which is what's it like to be a child, and how do we make it better? And as long as we can do that, then all of a sudden we do start seeing increasing amount of satisfaction and increasing amount of engagement from our children. I suppose the best test is whether our children are feeling welcome, whether they see a difference, whether they're engaged, and we do a number of surveys around that.
You said that you created an atmosphere of high support and high challenge. I wonder, in order to help children, how important is it to treat the adults around them as adults and shift responsibility in their direction, hold them accountable?
Well, yeah, I think that I think that's absolutely right. I think that the danger is, and this goes back to the quote from Madge Bray about if a child's current behaviour and essentially say in response to an untenable set of life circumstances. We need to be saying to adults, let's make the life circumstances of our children better, so that they're not living on untenable situations. And if they are, we need to challenge that. We need to say, well, why would we allow that to happen? Mostly, that's not because people are doing it deliberately. Mostly, it's because people are living in conditions of adversity, and we need to be supportive, but we also need to be challenging there.
One of our viewers is saying, Love hearing from Andy, so inspiring. A child-friendly ambition is so inclusive, and a focus that would really benefit us in Northern Ireland, not focusing on politics or culture. Who knows where we could be in the next 10 years. But he says, or she says, relationships are everything. How do we repair broken relationships? Relationships where there has been deep hurt and trauma.
I wouldn't want to pretend to be an expert on this, but I think that the idea of restorative practice, the idea of high support, high challenge, and the idea of building relationships is all about dialogue. It's all about being able to hear each other, using the restorative justice model as well when there has been harm. But with fractured relationships, it is for us to gently and carefully, but intentionally and deliberately, move into a place of healing.
Can I just double check?
Yes.
What do you mean by dialogue there? As a local authority, when you say dialogue, what do you mean?
Well, I think it's about the conversation. Too often we respond to a disagreement with either a process or a form, rather than saying, let's come and talk to me, let me hear what you're saying, and please will you listen to what I'm saying. We won't always agree, but if we move into bureaucracy before we move into humanity, then what we find ourselves in standoffs too quickly. Whereas if we start by saying, come and talk to us, come and talk to me as a named individual, and let's see what we can do about this. We can't always agree, we won't always agree, but I want to be able to hear what you're saying. I think that's what I mean.
Someone says, a very helpful point, relational, not transactional conversations. That stuck out to me as well. It would be great to have this infused in the logic of funding in general in the third sector. Any advice on how this relationship-orientated approach can be done? I mean, presumably your authority gives out funding to organisations who are hoping to buy in to this. Have you put that into practice with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that in the old days before lockdown, I used to spend a lot of money in coffee shops buying people coffee. And that's not just because I like having coffee with people, but it's because I want to build relationships rather than do transaction. Of course, we do transaction every day. We do transaction every day of the week that we buy a train ticket or a sandwich. Again, I'm talking about before lockdown. But they're easy. That's the easy bit. The relationship bit is, tell me what's in your mind, and let me tell you what's in my mind, and let's talk about what we have in common, as well as what is different about us. So I suppose that in terms of working with the third sector, I want to have conversations with colleagues in the third sector. They're a vital part of our overall offer to children and young people.
But there are lots of people, I'm sure, who would like to go for coffee with you, Andy, and try and convince you that what they're saying is right. But ultimately, you have paymasters as well. You've got political leaders. And how difficult is it for you to try and please both? And what do you expect of your political leaders, I suppose?
I think that we live in a political environment, and that's absolutely appropriate and necessary. So that's just part of what it is. I think that if we focus on the relationship, and if we focus on, we can't always give everything to everybody that they need or rather want. So there are always hard decisions to make, but hard decisions carefully explained through relationship are better than hard decisions which are explained through process.
Was there a trigger event that led to the creation of your post? Jerry asks very astutely. He says, if not, where did the energy and focus come from in order to pull this off?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just my post. I'm simply part of a whole system in Leeds. The trigger was that we had a visit from Ofsted, the inspectors, coming to look at children's services, and they came in about 2010. And the report that came out wasn't good. We weren't doing well, and there was a problem that we had to address.
What did they identify as those problems? I don't mean to dredge up your uncomfortable past, but what were they worried about?
I think that they were worried about the way that whether we were keeping children safe in Leeds in terms of the Children's Services Directorate, whether we were doing the right thing for children. And what we had to do something very different, and we did something very different. And we came on this journey, this restorative journey, this child-friendly journey, this doing things with rather than doing things to. Lots of bumps in the road, lots of complications and lots of challenges. But in 2018, after a number of different visits on the journey, but Ofsted came again and said that we were an outstanding local authority. So I suppose that the message there is it can be done. You can change a culture, you can change a system. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort from a lot of people, certainly not just an individual or a post holder, but the whole system. But it can be done, and it's a great journey to be on.
Congratulations to you. Finally, let's talk about that flower bed, which I think is remarkable, not just because it looks pretty, but it's, you said that the gardeners did it off their own bat, and I just wonder, what does that tell us about how the work that you're doing has infused itself into the public consciousness? Because in Northern Ireland, there's been a lot of work over the last 2 decades, but all too often we hear, oh, nothing's being done. No one's doing anything about the problems that we're facing. Of course, that's not true, but I'm not sure the schemes that are out there get the recognition that perhaps they should. You obviously are.
Well, I think that a pin badge of any sort doesn't change the life of a child, but what it does do is it brings some unity and some unification, and there's a message there. I think that we without wanting to be too boastful, we're not shy about what we're doing, and we try and tell people. And we try and tell people through social media, through campaigns, through meetings. And as you explain what we're doing, it's a very, very simple concept. And it's not a big ask. I think that this is one of the things that I would say. We're not asking people to give the whole of their life. We're saying, if you know something that I don't know, would you tell me so both of us know it? And I suppose that, put very simply and slightly light-heartedly, if you have 3 people in the room, one of whom plays an instrument, one of whom sings, and one of whom cooks, you've got a party. If they don't share those skills, you've got nothing.
Which one of those 3 do you do?
Well, I'm Welsh, so I'll sing.
We'll not get you started. Andy, it's been a real delight talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much
Andy Lloyd from Leeds.